Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church. And today we are looking at Peter's advice for elders and young men in the church, and general advice for Christians as well. But his main focus in this section is elders and young men. So we will read through this and then we'll look at some of the notes. He says, "And now a word to you who are elders in the church. I too am an elder and a witness to the sufferings of Christ, and I too will share in his glory when he is revealed to the whole world. As a fellow elder, I appeal to you, care for the flock that God has entrusted to you. Watch over it willingly, not grudgingly, not for what you will get out of it, but because you are eager to serve God. Don't lord it over the people assigned to your care, but lead them by your own good example. And when the great shepherd appears, he will receive a crown. You will receive a crown of never-ending glory and honor. In the same way, you who are younger must accept the authority of the elders, and all of you dress yourselves in humility as you relate to one another, for God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and at that right time he will lift you up in honor. Give all your worries and cares to God, for he cares about you. Stay alert, watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Stand firm against him and be strong in your faith. Remember that your family of believers all over the world is going through the same kind of suffering you are. In his kindness, God called you to share in his eternal glory by means of Christ Jesus. So after you have suffered a little while, he will restore you, or restore, support, and strengthen you, and will place you on a firm foundation. All power to him forever. Amen. And so Paul ends this letter, right? He this is his last chapter, chapter 5. He ends this letter with a final exhortation to the elders, right? The guide to the elders, to a little sentence to the younger men, and then to the church as a whole. And these exhortations are going to be followed by a final greeting and a closing, which is just a short couple of verses. And so his first focus here are the elders. And the elders are to be the spiritual leaders, or were the spiritual leaders of the early church, and are to be the spiritual leaders of the church. And that's what he's calling him to here. And sometimes, like, I really think, and I've talked about this a lot, we've lost our sense of what an elder is supposed to be in the church. And we've made them businessmen in charge of almost all the decisions, and we've taken and put them in a position of authority, and in many cases where you're not even allowed to question it. And they'll use verses like this to say, oh well, so you have to respect their authority, and don't question the elders and stuff like that. I mean, I've heard it taught and heard it preached that you were like, if the elders make a decision, you're not allowed to question it. Well, that's not what Peter is talking about here. And no, there's nothing wrong with questioning an elder. Now, it has to be done in respectful and humility, like Peter talks about here. But if an elder's wrong, or a decision that the elders makes wrong, you're more than welcome to question it and not follow along with it. And so this is where we've got to be careful in this. But the idea here is that the elders were to be the spiritual guides of of the church, right? They're to guide spiritually. They're not there to be the businessmen. And so we've really messed that role up a lot, where more than anything, the elders nowadays in most churches are just a board of elders who sit around and make business decisions. And and that's not the way. So the elders were to be the ones with the flock, helping them and help guide them in their spiritual journey and their spiritual care, you know, making sure they're not, going off the guardrails, and really helping them in their spiritual walk. And that's what an elder, or what the term we get now, pastor, in many cases, um, from and a lot of people have in the United States at least, we've kind of separated the two. There's the elder, who is a pastor, or has a responsibility of pastor, and then we have the title of someone who's a pastor, which is typically like the preacher and stuff as well. Now, but that's what an elder is supposed to be. And that person is supposed to be humble, and that person is not supposed to be doing what they're doing for gain or position or for power. And so we've got to really reread and re-go through this. And I think it would be really good for a lot of churches to sit down and really sit and study like really sit down and study what an elder is supposed to be and supposed to look at, and then realign the eldership with that. And that's just and it's my personal experience. The things that I've experienced with elders is it's most of the elders I've ran into, or in my Christian walk, where being a preacher's kid, most of the elders that we've ran into and that I've ran into, anyways, were they sought more of a position of power, kind of lording over the church, not really being a spiritual guide of the church. It was more of a, we're the ones who make the decisions about everything, and and literally there was many cases where, like, if you wanted to buy a coffee pot for the church, you had to ask the elders first, and so, and again, I'm not trying to come down negative, and I'm not trying to talk bad about the church, but it's just one of those things that if we don't address it, and if we don't talk about it, we can't improve it. And so those are the type of things that should not be something an elder is concerned about. The elder should be concerned about, hey, where are you with are you struggling right now with something spiritually? Or like, hey, I see that you're struggling with this particular sin, or and be there for them, and focusing on that, not making business decisions. And so, again, I'm big going based on what I've seen in the church, quite a bit, through many different churches, and so that's my advice. Is we really need to relook at our eldership, and more align it in a spiritual sense, and look at this. And so, on the flip side of that, right, the younger men, right, and this phrase, is in contrast to the elders. It could have referred to a particular class of, like, minister, or perhaps elders in training, or those who assisted the elders in various ways. More than likely, though, it was just to the younger men in the church, and that's where I lean. Some scholars think this was more focused on the people who were training to be elders, but I see this as the young for them, to the younger men in the church, and they are to be respectful of the elders, and in a humble way, and Peter calls both of them to be humble. And then, so I mean, like I said, it's okay to question an elder, or make it, ask questions, and do that kind of stuff, but it has to be in a humble, like, Christ-like way. You can't just be an obnoxious, annoying, I'm going to do whatever I want type. That's not a Christian attitude either. And so, again, respect the authority of the elders in a spiritual sense, and they are there to help guide you spiritually, and so we should respect that, and make sure that we do. And so then he shifts to the persecution and suffering. And he talks about how the Christians are being persecuted all over the world, and so persecution wasn't just confined to the churches in Asia Minor, and he said it was all over the world, and so in various forms and with very intensity. Right, Christians were persecuted from everywhere, really everywhere at that time that the good news had been preached about Jesus, and so it really wasn't more until you get into around 300, 400 AD that in Rome, like, the Christianity is legalized, and we see the persecution taper off. And so, really, for the first 300 or 400 years of the church, there was widespread persecution anywhere that the message was preached. So, what Peter does here is remind his readers, um, and this is a little bit to console them, and encourage them, is that they need to successfully endure a test of suffering. It was a test, and he says it's for a little while. Now, it could have been for 20 years. It could have been for 30 years, and still Peter would have wrote a little while, because sufferings on earth, right, while sometimes they could seem endless, right, could seem a really, really long time, they're in fact only momentary, right, compared to eternity. And so that's why Paul's reminding them, look, yeah, right, we might be suffering right now on this earth for fallen God, but remember, compared to where we're going and what we're going to receive, it's just it's a little while, it's a little tiny bit. And so I just, he encourages them to stay faithful into that. And he also uses one of the, famous verses most of us Christians are familiar with, is, that the devil is a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. And that's real important. I didn't put anything in my notes on that, but it's a really important thing to remember, because of who he is, right? We have to remember, like, a lot of times we have this imagery of the devil as this little man with a little red man with a pitchfork, right? It's kind of harmless, and he's not. He literally is going around waiting for your time of weakness. That's what lions do. They attack the weak, and they follow and they wait for someone to become weak, and then that's when they attack. And so we need to make sure that we stay strong in the faith, and don't let things keep us from falling away, to be able to be acceptable, susceptible to his to the devil, during a time of weakness. And so we have to remember that, hey, he is a lion seeking us to devour. So, as always, I hope that you learn from these. I hope that you pick something up from every one of these readings that we do. Tomorrow we'll look at just a couple verses. It's Paul's final greeting, and then we'll shift into 2 Peter and start going through it. So, as always, I encourage anyone who has not yet done so to subscribe to the channel. That way you can continue to follow along with us. And as always, I appreciate everyone who takes time to watch, and I hope y'all have a wonderful day.